Just how important in 2021 is it for producers to get acquainted, get comfortable, learn more about sound design? Well, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Your Bedroom Super Producer Podcast. We are your hosts. My name is JT.
My name is BK.
BK, I got to tell you, this is something that was not on my radar when I started to produce music. It's become a skill and a skill set that is extremely valuable in this computer age of making music. I don't know if you agree, but in the past 5, 6, maybe even 7 years, it's become really crucial for producers to master this skill.
I totally agree. I think you're referring to sound design, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I bet that most of our audience by now knows that you are the head sound designer over here at delicatebeats.com. And today I wanted to pick your brains on just how important sound design is to the modern producer. And so I've got a bunch of questions for you.
All right.
First question of a bunch, which is just how important in 2021 is it for producers to get acquainted, get comfortable, learn more about sound design?
Like you said, when we started, it wasn't necessarily something that we would gravitate to naturally. But I think on our side, we went towards sound design pretty quickly because we've always been a fan of movies, of Star Wars, of John Williams. And I think what we've always loved about Star Wars was first of all, the movie, but the interaction of the music and all the sound effects. So I think that was, like, for me, what the first like sound design ideas that came on my radar. And I think it's very important to today's producers because in this golden age of computer recorded music, we can say that it has kind of leveled the playing field, right?
Absolutely.
So everyone is pretty much using the same tools, the Logic, the Ableton. Pretty much you can have access to almost the same sample pack. There's not that much crate digging as there was in the sample era before the hip-hop era, the 90s and before that. So today, I think the way to differentiate yourself is by having great sound design, by having tailored presets that you made yourself, by having specific swooshy sounds at the beginning of the song, or having, a top model say the name of your brand at the beginning of the track. So I think that's why it's important today to really create your own sound, your own branding around your own tracks.
Interesting. You're making a great point that sound design is a very important part of your brand as a producer. Now, because sound design is such a complex discipline, I think that a lot of beginners will be scared off by actually how this whole process operates, meaning the tools are quite complex, the maneuvers and the techniques are quite complex, and while computer music in and of itself is very complex to learn and master, I think that if you're getting into beat making and you're seeing, as I referred to in a YouTube video, like the mountain of music production, it seems very steep and it can be quite discouraging. So my second question would be, how do you get started? Where do you start?
Well, there's many ways to go about it. I think one of the easiest ways to go about it, I would go towards sound libraries at first. And there's many good sound libraries out there with great sound design and great sounds. And just the fact of choosing the right sounds from those libraries, I think it gives your track an edge. Putting it on top, having the right transitions, or having the right background noise in a specific place, or a specific mood in the middle before the bridge or something. So I think that could be a starting point with sound libraries. I would suggest there's plenty of stuff like Native Instrument creates like beautiful instruments and has many sample packs for their instruments, preset packs also. I would say Heaviosity also has great stuff. Then there's like a lot of websites. Pro Sound Effect has tons of good stuff. Output makes great instrument. I think they're great starting points if you want to have special sounds that you can mangle or adjust yourself. ADSR, the website ADSR, a very good website in terms of presets, in terms of sample packs, in terms of tutorials. Of course, our site, delicatebeats.com, we have plenty of good libraries also to get started, and also tutorials on YouTube. So I think that's where you can get started. Once you're playing with these sounds, and once you're more at ease with like what you're looking for and the type of things you really want in your tracks, then it's time to reverse engineer sounds, and you would take sounds from these libraries and you would try to remake them, and you would try to use synthesized sounds and to create like your own sounds by using the oscillators and filters and other digital tools in your palette to recreate those sounds. So that would be the first step in my book.
I really like the in your first point, you made a very important distinction, because sound design is first and foremost about training your ears. And because at the end of the day, we're making music, I like the fact that you said you have to understand which presets and which sounds work in what context. And so, of course, you can't just start by creating your own sounds. You need to be able, as you said, to use certain sounds in your own compositions and see what works for you. Also, what I like about your second point is the fact that you don't necessarily just have to learn a new synthesizer to do sound design. You can use samples and mangle them, as you said. And so it's not just about learning to program synthesizers or synthesis per se. So I like that. Shall we move on to question number 3?
Sure.
Okay. So for people that don't know, you have created a huge challenge and undertaking for yourself in the past few years. And could you tell our audience exactly how you approached becoming an expert at sound design? Because I think that story is quite interesting.
Strangely enough, I think it came pretty naturally. I've always been interested in understanding the presets, basically, because all the beautiful tools that we use all have thousands of presets, and usually people get so overwhelmed with the thousands of knobs and sliders that are on the different synth that we buy. And so basically what everyone does is every year you just buy tons of stuff and you only use the presets, right?
Yep, I'm guilty as charged.
So in a way, that's a very good way to have music sound pretty much the same and pretty much as what the preset designers are doing right now. And I thought that since we had been making music for like quite a while back then already, that maybe if we could have our own custom presets and customize it to the types of sound, the types of like urban sound that we were working on back then, or maybe tailor it to something more cinematic or something more EDM, that it would make our songs better, right?
Yep.
And I kind of, that's how I got into it, just by wanting to have my own like preset stack and effects on top of those presets, just customize it to our sound so that our tracks, our beats, our songs would sound a little bit more custom and a little bit more fresh and a little bit more like what we're trying to brand on Delicate Beats. That's how I started.
And then I think that you set out to produce X number of presets, and you set the bar extremely high. Just how many presets did you set out to create? I think it was like 2 years ago or 3 years.
I don't even remember, honestly. I don't even remember.
Was it 1,000? Something like that.
I don't know.
A crazy number.
I think I wanted to, at some point we were talking maybe 2-3 years ago, and I think my goal for the year was to create like 1,000 preset just for that year or something like that.
And I think you did.
I think I did. I'm not sure we used them all for the packs, but I think I did create like something around 1,000 presets.
And I really like that because, I mean, by setting an unbelievably high goal for yourself, I think that at some point you kind of set aside the need to make every preset work or every preset important or every preset usable. And I think that that's a great way to just dive into like pure creativity.
Yeah, indeed. Because at the end of the day, there's two ways to go about it. You can either create something tailor-made for a specific track that you're trying to use it in, right? That's going to be this one special preset with, I don't know, a special polyphony, a special filter, or a special movement that you're trying to induce in the track. Or you can go about it more as a stylistic or a style exercise. And you can say, I'm going to create 10 patches that could really work well in a cinematic environment, in something that a YouTuber would want, or for a nature documentary or something that would go well if people would talk over it. So you kind of do it in another way. You motivate yourself with different aspects of production, different aspects of why you would create that preset, and in a way that's good because you're always evolving and you're always trying to find new ways to create that special sound, and you move away from usually you create a preset that's going to be up front in the track, that's going to be that you want to kind of showcase your sound design abilities, and you want people to say, oh, look at this synth, it sounds so well, it's kick-ass, whatever. And the more you make presets, the more you realize that some presets are just going to be like sometimes just a little background rattling thingy, or just a little noise that's going to be pumping at the same speed as the track, or a little bit of a layer of noise on top of the kick to give it a little bit more punchiness. And you really start to do it in a way to complement the song and not necessarily to be the star of the song.
Yeah, that's interesting because indeed in modern, especially like Serum and massive sound design, a lot of the preset makers forget about that aspect, and a lot of presets it's like the whole song.
Exactly.
And sometimes it's difficult to build an arrangement around these types of sounds. But I also want to reiterate one point, a great point that you made, is that, and it parallels some stuff that we talked about on the previous episode, is that you need to start out with a goal. So what is your goal? Is it to make presets that sound like Skrillex? Is it to create pads that sound like a certain Netflix show that you heard that you like, for example? And so this is a great way to focus better on what you're trying to achieve in terms of learning, because anything that you learn, you will need to have kind of a roadmap ahead of you to guide you and not get lost in all of the information that's available online today. So let's keep moving forward with my next question, which is, when you created those 1,000 presets, what are some of the lessons you learned? You already touched on certain key discoveries, but I would like you to reiterate on those. if you need to. But basically, what do you learn from creating 1,000 presets?
I think the main lessons, I think, when you create a lot of presets is you realize that the less is better. Like you said, like you mentioned, that sometimes when you go through the massive sound banks or the Serum sound banks, everything sounds so big and everything is like things that should be up front. And I think if you think as a producer and you're thinking in terms of layering things and creating those special sound that are gonna sound good together, but at the same time you still want a little bit of contrast between your sounds. When you're making presets, you pretty much want, at the end of the day, if you're going to be combining a lot of layers, each layer should be very pure. So not too much movement. Or if you have a layer that has movement, then you combine it with a layer that doesn't have movement. And that you can apply it, let's say to something like Serum. If you're using the two oscillators, or you're also using the sub oscillator and also using the noise oscillator, don't make each oscillator too busy. They have to fit together. You always have a lot of oscillator. People think that to have something complex and to have something that's going to be very good, you have to use every oscillator. Like in Massive, you need to use the 3 oscillators. Like in Serum, you need to use the sub and the 2 others, and like crank it up and have multiple layers of that. You don't necessarily have to. I think one of the things that I learned is that usually one oscillator with like an LFO applied on it and like a filter is going to be something that's going to have way more grit, that's going to have way more punch. Let's say you're trying to make a bass sound or something. Usually people try to layer many things on top of each other and they don't really know what everything does, so it doesn't necessarily sound that good. I think it's better to start with a very low amount of layering or components together. I think that's one of the main thing that I learned.
Right. So it's a balancing act. If you have a very busy LFO shape, for example, try to use only one oscillator. And if you have this huge unison lead type sound, maybe use a simpler LFO shape, for example, something like that.
Exactly. Something very basic. I think it's easier to start with something simple and make it more complex if it requires to, than to have something super busy and then not understanding why everything is clashing together. And sometimes you have effects of all the different things that are clashing together, and sometimes there's so many that it's very difficult to pinpoint which oscillator is the problem oscillator, which one should be lower, what is the filter sweep like too soon or too late, or I don't know if you understand where I'm going with this. It's always easier to work with simple sounds and then going towards more complex. And if it depends what you're trying to do. If you want to have 3 elements in your track, maybe have a busy Serum preset is fine. But let's say you want to layer 5 or 6 elements to have a more contrast in your track. Well, maybe 5 less busy elements or 5 simpler presets are going to work much better.
Mm-hmm. So would you say? I think that's what you're saying, is that layering is very much part of the sound design process.
Exactly. It's it's always layering. Like the way synths work today is it's a lot about layering. You're putting an oscillator on top of another oscillator, and then you're combining it with is it basically noise or another sub oscillator, combining with different, like which octave you want to use on each oscillator. Then you're going to be putting something that's going to modulate on top of that. Then you're going to be putting a filter on top of that, and then pretty much effects on top of that. So yeah, it's pretty much you can talk about layering in a track, but you can also talk about layering in an instrument preset. You can also talk about layering if you're creating a sound from scratch.
And it's interesting because this concept in music applies to about anything, where you start out with a great simple idea and then you add complexity, because if your base is not solid, then it's going to fall apart. And so if I'm making a track and the chord progression I'm using is not all that, it doesn't matter how many, unison patches I lay on top of one another, it's still going to be a bad idea to start off with. And I think that also applies to creating a preset. You said, for example, for bass sounds, use simpler shapes to have a more body to your sound. Whereas if you try to put too many oscillators, it's going to thin out at some point, right?
Exactly.
And it's just
basically you're going to have many sounds fighting for that little spot that you're trying to create. This basically this notch in your track. The bass has to fit in a certain region, and if you're creating something with like too many elements and too much movement and too much modulation and too much filtering and too much effect, you're kind of diluting the effect and all the horsepower that you have. You're diluting them because you're just putting it there just to be there. So it's important to understand, like you said, what are you really trying to do? What is the impact that you're trying to have? Sometimes just a square wave with a little bit of a filter sweep is going to be the perfect baseline, and you don't need to have like 4, 5, 6 square waves on top of each other. Okay, so it depends. It depends what you're looking for. And I think one of the fun thing about sound designing is that the fact that you're thinking about the building blocks of your sound, it makes you a better musician. It makes you a better producer because you're forced to think about that. You're not just thinking. Today, people come into music and they're already thinking about the song, and they're taking these pre-built building blocks that you could get on Splice, and drum beats already pre-made, synth lines and bass line. They're just mashing them together without necessarily understanding, is it something that fits together or doesn't fit together? It's a good exercise. It's super fun to do, just to put things together, and sometimes having that magic moment of, oh my God, this was made to go together. They're not from the same pack, but it's awesome. But it's also fun to understand, how did the people make those sounds? What were those sounds made for? What is the frequency range of the kick drum that I used for this thing, and what is the frequency range of the bass that I took from this pack? Oh, they're overlapping. I'm going to need to EQ them a little bit. And I think that doing sound design forces you to learn, forces you to understand how sounds interact with each other, how noise interacts with sound, how sometimes you want noise, sometimes you want to remove it, sometimes you want modulation, sometimes it creates mud. Sometimes you want side chaining to make things fit together, or etc. I think it makes you more proficient at making music in general, and that's what's fun about sound design.
I think you're making a great point also, that something that's very central to sound design also is rhythm. And for example, when you're creating a patch and you have this LFO shape, well, a great way to keep it solid is to use just this one LFO shape to, alter the volume of an oscillator, or trigger, a filter of some sort, or even, modulate certain effects in your post-processing chain. And going further with this concept, once a sound is doing something according to a certain LFO shape, then probably the percussions and the drums should follow that rhythm. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So sometimes it's just finding this one key rhythmic pattern and then follow suit with everything that you're doing, both on this in terms of effects, in terms of drum programming, uh, and then even the way you'll probably arrange your chords to follow that rhythm again.
Yep.
So interesting. Yeah, I think that you touched on a very, very important aspect, because sometimes we're tempted to have all this crazy routing and different LFOs doing different things because we want to feel like we've done something complex. Therefore, we're mastering, in a sense, this art, whereas really we're creating too much complexity for the music's sake. Um, Moving on, where would you point beginners to some of the best tools to get acquainted with sound design?
Tools to make sounds.
Doesn't matter. It could be post
Um,
processing effects. It could be sound generation tools. What would be like the perfect little toolkit to get started with?
like basically today anyone can do sound design. You don't even need a computer. There's great tools for the iPad. There's great tools for the iPhone that you can create like really cool stuff. So let's say a tool like the Flip sampler. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Nope, never heard of it.
It's an app for iPads and for iPhones, and it's pretty much an app that it's by Andrew Huang. You know Andrew?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So he created this app, and you basically take any sound on your phone, or you can record any sound, be it in nature, be it in the subway, be it on like anywhere outside, or your voice or whatever, and then you can pass it through the processing of that app on your iPhone or your iPad. So just a small tool like that, and boom, et voila, you're opening your world to sound design.
So the Flip sampler.
I think it's just called Flip. I think it's
Flip.
It's just
Flip
on.
by Andrew Wang.
Yeah, it's just on iOS, I think, for now. It's a pretty great little tool. You can pretty much do anything on it. You can play them, like you can play the sounds that you put in, like with little pads. You can mangle the sound. You can filter, EQ, do whatnot. You have like a track player in there. It's pretty complete, and I think it's something like $10 or $9.99 or something. And it's incredible to have that on your phone and then you can export everything else and then use it in your DAW after. So it's pretty incredible. So just as a starting point, your iPad or your iPhone, and there you go.
I like that because that means you don't necessarily need to spend $200, $300, $500 on, say, Serum or on a Sphere. You can really just get started with a $10 app on your phone
and just see, do you like doing it? Do you like mangling things? What can you do with a $10 app,
Interesting.
Other stuff that I love for sound design, maybe that's going to get a little bit more expensive. Of course, Ableton Live already has many different plugins. If you're lucky enough to have the Ableton suite, everything that you need is in there, be it instruments like the operator. The wavetable is a fantastic synth for sound design, be it the analog synth, Collision, or just the drum rack to create different drums that you can have. You can have different effects on each drum pad, so that's completely incredible. Other tools that I like, and something in Logic Pro, if you have the Logic Pro suite, also Alchemy in Logic is pretty awesome. ES1 in Logic is very good. To people more serious about their DAW, of course, like we talked about earlier, Serum is a very complete synth package that you can do pretty much any type of sound design with there. Great sound engine, great wavetables. You can create your own wavetables. You can create your own noise and use them in there. There's plenty of effects that can be applied, from reverb to chorus to flanger to anything you want in there, all in the synth. So you don't even need to use external stuff. Of course, the old school stuff, Massive. I haven't used the new Massive. I don't know if it's good or not. All the native instrument stuff in my book is perfect for sound design and also for learning sound design. There's pre-made stuff that sounds super good, that you can use as a template. At first, like I said, just use them as is, and then just try to recreate them. I think that's the best ways to understand the tools that you're going to be using, is take a preset and take another instance, start from scratch, put all the knobs at the same place, and see what it sounds like. Try to recreate the preset and try to understand why it doesn't sound exactly the same, even though the preset, the knobs are exactly the same way as what you see on the actual preset, and then understanding that there's something going on behind the scenes, and there's some mapping that you need to do behind the scenes, and something that you need to adjust, and another part of the learning process into sound design. Of course, on my side, all the Arturia stuff is incredibly powerful for sound design. All their synth, the V7 collection, all the synth that they've recreated is simply incredible for me. I don't know about you, but I use a lot of Arturia stuff. Like the Analog Lab is pretty incredible, just how they combine everything. There's recreation of pretty much everything. There's recreation for Buckla synth, for the ARP 2600. There's recreation for the Jupiter 8. So we've been saying that you don't even need to have a $500 or whatever to invest to start. But if you're getting serious about it, the V7 collection of Arturia is pretty much a no-brainer. All those synth for, I think, something like $400 or $500 for me is a no-brainer to have access to all those recreations that you would never have the real money to own in real life, and probably wouldn't even have a room to put them in. So for me, that's a no-brainer. Aside from that, if you're really really serious about sound design, then I think at the end of everything, all the tools, the digital tools and everything that I've mentioned, I think if you really want to go deep into the rabbit hole, I think you're going to have to get into modular. But I think that's another show, something that we could talk about eventually. But modular synth is something also that's would be very proficient to create unheard sound on this earth.
Interesting. So for people out there, there are countless tools that you can get your hands on to get started with sound design. I myself have always had too many plugins, and everything kind of fell into place once I found the plugin that, or should I say the software, pardon me, that had the right workflow. And I'm very big on efficiency, speed, and basically finding tools that have GUIs or interfaces that connect the right way to my brain. And one of which you've already, or actually you mentioned both, but the first one, and I think it's my main tool to mangle sounds, is Ableton Live. And just your DAW is a very, very important component of this whole process. You don't even need sound generation tools to just alter sounds. And I think that all of the algorithms, the time stretching, and the pitch shifting abilities of Ableton Live, for me, really unlocked my creativity in a way that I knew was possible, but I previously was a Logic user and it was not giving me the results. But once I switched to Ableton a few years ago, it really, really changed everything for me. And then on the synthesis aspect or side of things, once I got my hands on Serum, is really where I was able to start slowly and create my own little patches. I'm nowhere near where I should or would want to be in terms of sound design skills, but still having the right synth that you can just open up, start with a blank preset, like just a saw wave, and then easily find your way through to a little bit of modulation, a little bit of post processing, is really where I started to feel like, hey, I can actually do this. I can actually create my own sounds. And so finding the right tools with the right workflow is really important. And how do you do that? Well, I think that it's part, intuition. It's part looking at a lot of videos and demonstrations on YouTube, and kind of getting a feel for the tool, seeing if you like the interface, seeing if it inspires you. That's actually why we create skins also, just to drive your creativity even further, because the eyes are oftentimes, kind of a trigger for inspiration, even though music is felt with your ears. And so that was my point about finding the right tools, how to approach that. And I got one last question for you today, BK. Can you point us to like your top 3 YouTube references, people that you admire and that you keep learning from, and that you keep going back to learn more about sound design?
There's so many, honestly, there's so many good stuff on YouTube. I think the 2 main resources that I would like steer people towards, the Native Instrument website is very complete. There's tons of interviews, tons of people who show how the product work, and also tons of like artists who show their workflow in the different instruments in there. I think that's very, very rewarding for someone learning. The Ableton YouTube is very complete. A lot of artists testimonies, and they show their workflow. I think that's something that I love watching, like almost every day. Like, see how someone works with the same tool that you're using. What are they doing different? What are they recording? What sound banks they're using? What are they reversing this sound? Are they pitching this thing up or doing something? And that's it's very interesting to see how people work with just the DAW that you're using. So that's what I would recommend. In terms of people, I recently, in terms of tutorials, like I said recently, ADSR music production, I think, is very complete. A lot of good tutorials. In terms of people that I like watching, Junkie XL, which he's a movie composer that's been working with Hans Zimmer and work on Superman movies and many different movies. His website is, well, his YouTube is very clear on how he makes the sound. Sometimes he's gonna go through just a section of a particular movie and how he arranged the strings and how he did the sound design, which instrument did he play, which instrument came from which sound bank, and etc. And it's very complete. So Junkie XL for me, something that I go to often. Like I said earlier, for the app, Andrew Huang, very, very cool. Lots of good content, lots of like basic explanation. Sound, if you want to know about sound design, he explains it very clearly. If you want to know about modulars, then he explains it very clearly. He does many different things. It's fun to see an artist, his workflow, and his content is very, very good to learn about sound design. Aside from that, pioneers like Richard Devine, I think, is one of my favorite out there. He just, like, YouTube his name, Richard Devine. His studio is amazing. He uses everything from Serum to Massive to all his modular rig to all the workstation, all the keyboards, Moog, you name it, he has it. So he's a He's an authority on music in general and sound design and quirky sounds and everything. So I think these names, those are the ones that I usually go back to. Andrew Wang, Richard Devine, Junkie XL. These days, that's what I listen to. There's many, many, many more, but it would take another hour just to name all the different composers and the sound designers that we love.
I think you have great picks, and if I've learned anything from you today, is that there is absolutely a framework to learn sound design, and everyone should get started on their sound design journey, as it is very, very important to create your own sound, develop your brand, and basically become your own unique producer. And so I would try and venture into building this framework for our audience right now. And what I've learned is, first, you need to just get acquainted with the sounds. So start playing around with sounds, download presets, whether it be on Splice or ADSR or delicatebeats.com, and then just start making music with presets. Understand what works, what doesn't, what takes you in which direction, what kind of sounds work for what genres. Once you've done that, if you're a complete user or something like that, try to deconstruct all of your presets. Don't just start making music and use the presets as they were intended to, but as BK said, try to understand what does what, how many oscillators are being used. Are there any LFOs, and what's the routing? Is there any post-processing or effects if it's maybe like a serum preset or something? Once you've done that, then it's time to find your tools of choice. So is your DAW an integral part of your sound design process? If it's not, maybe it should become an integral part. And then what are the sound generation tools that you're going to go back to? And what are the post-processing effects you're going to be using a lot? If you like distortion, maybe then invest, for example, in a great distortion plugin or unit. Am I missing anything? Once you have the right tools, then maybe it's time to set yourself like a crazy goal like BK did. Maybe you want to try to create 10,000 presets over the next 10 years, something crazy like that. That way you remove the aspect of trying to go somewhere and you just let your creativity flow 110%. And I guess that's how I would summarize very, very fast and maybe not so efficiently what you've just said in the past hour. So on this note, BK, take it away.
Well, yeah, I think that was a very good resume or a wrap up of what we talked about today. Like I said, from our side to your side, we're going to wish you a great day of mangling sounds and creative filtering and distortion enabling your plugin, and go out and make those crazy sound. And at the end of the day, the fun thing about this whole journey is that you get to create your own custom sounds for your own custom tracks, and that's, for me, pretty awesome. On that note, have a great day making music, and see you guys next time. Peace out.
Peace.
Thanks for listening to the podcast, guys. Remember to subscribe if you like what you hear. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube. Also, if you want to support us, head on to delicatebeats.com. You can find our serum packs, our contact instruments, and also plenty of freebies if you subscribe to the newsletter. Don't forget to follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and once again, keep making that awesome music.